Good evening, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to episode 13 of Pat's Nation Nightly. I am Zach, co-hosted, as always, by Ben. And today we have the one and only Christopher Price on the show as our Friday guest star. How are you both doing tonight?
I'm doing great. It's my pleasure to be here, guys. I couldn't be happier. And as we talked about before we came on, this is kind of a little bit of the calm before the storm here, because next week it really starts to kick up, and it's a lot of fun. But I'm looking forward to talking draft and covering the Patriots with you guys.
Well, we're excited to have you on. We have a jam-packed show today. Kind of starting with your background as a Patriots supporter. You have a lot of experience in the NFL and with the Patriots, and then kind of moving to the NFL draft. As we know, that is 6 days away now, 6 days away. So I guess we'll just roll right into it here. How long have you been covering the Patriots, and how long have you been reporting in the NFL, and just a little background on your journey, Chris?
I started working for a small newspaper in Boston. Some Boston folks might remember this, the Boston Metro, back in 2001. It was a commuter newspaper. And I was the sports editor, and I thought, well, we need someone to cover the Patriots. I'll go down and cover it a couple times a week. It won't be very good. They're coming off a 5-11 season. I'll go down and it'll be fun. I'll get some clips. No big deal. And, fast forward 23 years, and it's defined my professional career, quite frankly. I'm not kidding you guys. This sounds like a story every time I tell it, but I'll put my hand on a Bible or whatever the case may be. First game I ever covered was when Mo Lewis knocked Drew Bledsoe sideways. It was the first game that I was there as a reporter, and I was just in the station when the right train came through. And I was able to kind of, I've been able to follow that, that train, to continue the metaphor for an awful long time. I had a break for a couple of years when I worked as a web producer at the Globe, but now I'm back in the beat, and it's been phenomenal. It has. It's been absolutely phenomenal. It's defined my professional career. I've written 4 Patriots books, and it's just, I continue to marvel at my good fortune when it comes to my professional development.
In hindsight, we all know what that hit then ended up leading to, a whole 20-year dynasty. But at that point, when it happened, we didn't know Tom Brady was going to be Tom Brady. What was it like covering your first game ever and seeing a franchise QB get knocked out?
In that moment, Zach, we did not think it was a serious hit. Of course, now in retrospect, 20 plus years later, we understand that it was a very serious hit, that, that Drew has continued to have some, had some health issues around it. And it was a very serious time for him. I could not tell you that I was able to identify Tom Brady as the next great thing that summer. I thought he was good, and I thought he was competitive, but I thought that, he was just going to kind of continue to kind of ascend, but he was not going to be the guy who he ended up becoming, quite frankly. So it was wild that first year, because from a personal perspective, my wife and I got engaged in early September of 2001, with thinking that, okay, well, let's get married in April of 2002. That'll be great. And of course, the Patriots continue to, on this magic carpet ride, and she was left to plan the wedding all by herself. God bless her. So just be careful. When it comes to planning, I'll say as future NFL writers, just be careful, just be mindful of the roster that you might have that might impact your personal development down the road.
So let me know, did you realize that Tom Brady, is going to be Tom Brady? He was going to be something special, someone to win 6 Super Bowls. Was there an exact game day? When did you realize that he was going to be the next GOAT?
I thought he was going to be I'll say this. I thought he was going to be really special. The late December game against the Dolphins that was in Foxborough, they were able to clinch. I think they clinched the playoffs. I don't know. They didn't clinch a playoff spot, but that got them over the hump. That they got into the postseason. And in that moment, it's like, you could really have something here. I didn't really understand that he was going to become the GOAT until 2003. Really, probably 2000. I mean, that team, they started out absolutely on fire in 2002, coming off the win in Super Bowl 36. But to be able to win 2 in 3 years right out of the gate like that, I thought was very, very impressive. But he continued to stack success, just more and more and more. For me, the most unbelievable season to cover was still 2007 and all of the drama that went along with it on and off the field. But I thought within the first couple of years, it was clear that the Patriots had something special with him. But, you get to a point 2 and 3 years, 3 and 4 years, it starts to become obvious, then you say, okay, well, they might have something here with this guy Brady.
When you're looking back on it, what are some of the differences you see maybe in 2001 and 2002 when you were covering the team, then 2007 and 2008, kind of in the middle of that dynasty, and then obviously in 2019 to where we are right now, kind of post-dynasty?
You're talking purely from a football perspective?
Kind of as someone who's, as a reporter's perspective, as someone in the media, kind of covering the team day in and day out in the locker rooms, what are some of the things that kind of stick out to you?
The digital aspect of how this job has changed, I still am amazed at how things are different now. I mean, I started in 2001, and this is going to sound like, leather helmets and dirt fields, but there was no Twitter. There was no the impact, the real true digital impact had yet to be made when it came to covering the league. There was the web, but it certainly didn't have the impact that it had, even a few years later. So that's changed the way we go about our jobs in a fairly dramatic way. It's also, I think, delivered a layer of kind of a meritocracy that if you work and you bust your ass and you get stuff on Twitter, you can make a name for yourself as a reporter, and that can lead to bigger and better things. I guess ultimately the ability to adapt to the way journalism has evolved from 2001 to 2024. I like to think I've been able to do that, but it's been a real challenge for a lot of people. And I think that's the biggest difference from a purely journalism perspective. The impact of the digital, social media, all of that has changed the way we cover football dramatically.
And then just like more, I guess, from a football perspective, covering those great teams and then the post-Brady era, and now I know it's super early on, but the post-Belichick era, what do you see in those differences, even in such like an early aspect of it?
Zach, I gotta say, man, it's really weird. It is coming back, and having to manage and really navigate a whole new world is really something that is a challenge, not just for fans, but for people who cover the team, because we got used to writing not the same story, but the same fundamental, elements of the game story, ever since, they started this run, and they would find a way to win, and Belichick would pull something out of his hat, and there would be a great play from Brady or Ty Law or Rob Gronkowski or whoever. That it's changed, and now in a lot of ways they're a lot like everybody else, and that's difficult for fans to wrap their head around, and it's also difficult for a lot of media to wrap their head around, because you have to change the way you cover a team. And I'll give you the best example. Last December, in previous Decembers, it was, well, gear up for the postseason. What's it going to look like? What is the playoffs going to look like? Is everyone healthy? Potential playoff opponents. Who would the Patriots most like to face, and who would they least like to face? Now you get to last December and it's the Patriots playing the role of spoiler, and which youngster might end up making the most of his playing time because player X, Y, and Z are injured. So you have to kind of reset your brain a little bit as a reporter, as a journalist, as someone who's covered such an elite team for such a long time. Things have changed. And so you have to kind of change along with it as a reporter.
And then also just obviously again, Belichick, being away from the team now, he's transitioning. The media has had to transition from covering such a great team to, a not as great team. Bill Belichick seems to be transitioning from coaching a great and not so great team to now covering it. What do you think is, I guess, on the board for him? What's coming up other than like covering the draft soon and all that?
My hot take here, Zach, is he's going to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys by the start of the 2025 season.
Mm.
I do. I see your mouth open there, Ben. I was wondering if I caught you by surprise with that. Yeah, I think he's going to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys starting it. And it may be. And I had this back and forth with someone on social media that, look, if the Cowboys start 4-4, would they be inclined to, pull the trigger on Mike McCarthy and bring Bill in? I think it's really difficult to try and figure out a coaching change mid-season, because I think a lot of times it could do more harm than good. You have to consider the coaching styles, the locker room, all that. But I think by the start of the 2025 season, he is coaching in Dallas. I think both of them have something the other wants. I think it would give Bill the opportunity to, with a playoff, ready roster, chase another Super Bowl, chase the Shula record, and it would also give the Cowboys some much needed credibility at the coaching position that they haven't had for an awful long time, and a coach who has playoff experience. And so, given the level of respect that exists there on both sides, I think it makes too much sense for him not to be the guy when it starts all over again in 2025.
Now, I'll give you credit. You told me, I think a week after Belichick was let go by the Patriots, that, the Cowboys are going to be the number one team to go after him. So if that happens, I know who I'm texting first. Kind of staying with that a little bit, how do you think that Bill Belichick would interact with Jerry Jones? Would that be a healthy relationship? They both kind of have big egos.
Yeah. I think it's a great point, Ben. But I think ultimately, like I said, each one has something that the other wants. And I think with that understanding, if everyone goes into it with the same level of expectation, I think it's going to be okay. I always go back to the fact that Parcells got along with him, and I'm not talking about, we're not also talking about a coach owner relationship that I expect to last for 20 years. This is going to be, I'm assuming, 5 years tops, maybe 3. Again, this is going to exist long enough for Bill to, get the Shula record, and for the Cowboys to kind of establish a footprint as a serious playoff football team and maybe win a Super Bowl. Who knows? But yeah, I don't think that would be a relationship. Let's just say it wouldn't be a relationship built for long-term success. It would be a short-term thing, a 3-year thing, that I think ultimately would be very, very good for both sides.
So in your eyes, what went wrong then for Belichick last couple of months? I know an ESPN article came out saying, that was a whole lot of, he said, she said. But why didn't he get a head coaching job?
Ben, I think there's a number of different things at play. I think, first of all, specific to Atlanta, I don't think the relationship between Rich McKay and Bill Belichick would have been a functional one, given what we know about the two of them. I also think that they're not a lot of good fits out there for a guy at that stage of his career. That being said, he's still the best coach of all time. I fully say he's the best coach of all time. I'm going to be fascinated to see, as a really quick aside, I'm going to be fascinated to see now that the Atlanta Falcons have an awful bright spotlight on them, because they've very publicly cast their lot with Raheem Morris. If they go 7-10 next year and Bill is, heading off to Dallas and making the playoffs, well, maybe they made the wrong move. So I think it's going to be interesting. But I think ultimately, to get back to your question, it happens with every coach and owner. It's just, and I'm just surprised. Part of me is just surprised it lasted for 20 years. That whether it's ego, money, desire for credit, whatever the case may be, it's all going to conspire to kind of corrode that owner-coach relationship. Now, we've never seen it. I'll sit here and tell you, you're never going to see a head coach and an owner together for 20 years ever again. It's not going to happen. It just doesn't happen in this day and age. So again, I think that there's something to kind of step back and marvel at the fact that they kept it together for as long as they did. But I just think in the era that that we live in, and the NFL exists, I just, it's all going to go south at some point again over whatever you want, whether it's ego, money, whatever the case may be.
And the Cowboys, or I guess just this year in free agency, they didn't really make any big moves. They kind of let a lot of their top tier free agents walk. Mike McCarthy is on the last year of his contract, I believe. Dak Prescott, same thing. They're not really building for the future, I would say. It seems that they're saving cap space maybe for next year. Do you think that's with the anticipation of potentially hiring Bill Belichick?
I think that's part of the conversation. I don't think it's the only reason, but I think that's one of like 12 reasons. I also think too that we saw it here in New England over the last couple of years, including the last couple of years, where guys still want to play for Bill Belichick. And I think that's an attraction. I'm not saying that everyone's going to take a cut rate deal to stampede down to Dallas and play for Bill, but I think that's part of it. I think the other thing too, and I brought this up on our podcast with Chris Hogan the other day, Bill is a history guy, and no disrespect to the Jacksonville Jaguars, let's say, but it means more to coach the Dallas Cowboys. He loves the historical aspect of the sport, and it's just there's a little bit more cachet when it comes to coaching the Dallas Cowboys than there is, I don't know, fill in the blank, whatever the case may be. So I think that's part of it. Ultimately, Zach, to get back to your question, I think the fact that maybe they're loading up for something. I don't know if I would give Jerry and Stephen Jones that much credit, to be thinking that far ahead, but I think that's part of the conversation.
Now, as a media guy who is there day in and day out in the building, how is it going to be different covering a team that doesn't have the greatest coach of all time, making all the decisions? Like I've seen watching the press conferences, they have this big table now instead of, I don't know what you call the president or the vice president. Yeah. What they speak out of. But like just talk about like some of the differences you anticipate happening next season.
Well, I'll tell you this, that it's going to be it's going to be different. It is. It's going to be different. It's already been different. You can talk to some coaches, you can talk to some of the, we talked to them at the combine, you can talk to Gerard. And that's, look, people do things differently. And I get that. I understand that. I'm not saying that one is better than the other because honestly, and I'll address the fans here real quick. The fans do not care one way or another. If the team wins, the coach could act whatever way you want. So I'm just saying from my own perspective as a media member, to be able to get those sorts of information, info nuggets, let's just call them, helps inform my reporting. And it helps me do a better job. And so, look, it's been different. It is. It's been different. I'm going to say it's, worse or better or whatever the case may be. It's just been different. And I think that's part of us kind of having to get used to a whole new world in all of this, that we can talk to the coach. We can talk to the GM. The other thing, too, that I think is going to be interesting, Bill was able to build up a level of, there was in Bill we trust. There was some social currency there that, based on his track record. And I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case or shouldn't be the case right out of the gate with guys like Gerard and Elliott because they're still kind of working toward that. So, look, are they going to be as interested in talking to us when they're 3-10 in December? Who knows? But it's certainly been very, very different so far.
Do you think it's like, is there a level of importance with the Patriots now having two separate people running the main football operations? Obviously, Bill Belichick was the team's head coach and the GM, and now there's Gerard Mayo and Elliot Wolf, Matt Groh factored in there, and I guess just a lot more decision makers seemingly. How important do you think that is?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the dynamic there, Zach, especially if there is a break in overall football philosophy. I think everyone is on the same page so far. It's my understanding that they feel very strongly about taking a quarterback. That being said, I could see them moving, and if the opportunity presents itself. But I think the buzzword right now in the offices at Gillette Stadium is collaborate or collaboration. That's if you're playing a Patriots drinking game, a Patriots press conference drinking game, every time someone says collaborate or collaboration, you take a drink. And the other one is draft and develop. That's the other phrase, by the way. But yeah, so far they're all on the same page, and I just you look at the history of franchises where there is the GM is hired and the head coach is hired, and it can be a little dicey, but I think they've been able to make it work so far. The other thing too here, and let's just sit here and say it, Elliot Wolf is going to be the GM. Right now he's kind of got the interim tag a little bit. He's going to end up being the GM. He's going to sign a 3 or 4 year deal. We're going to come back after the draft and they're going to go through a whole series of interviews. But Elliot Wolf is going to get the job. He should get the job. He's earned the job. He's been around the league long enough. But yeah, it's when you go from an era of one singular figurehead guy who's running the show to a collaboration process, I think there are going to be some bumps in the road. But so far they haven't hit any, at least as far as I can tell.
If Elliot Wolf, maybe it's the second or third round, and it's not as decisive of a pick. Elliot Wolf has his mind set on a guy. Wow, Cameron Williams, Matt Groh, maybe Alex Van Pelton, they really want this guy. Elliot Wolf, you think, is he going to get, that final say no matter what? Or is it going to be something like, okay, we all have to be on the same page, kind of like you were just alluding to?
Ben, I asked Elliot Wolf yesterday, I said, look, we talked to you at the combine. You said you were the one who pulls the trigger at number 3. Has anything changed in that regard? And he said no, but at the same time, if everyone else in the room wants someone else and I want one guy, we're going to have a conversation. It goes back to the idea of collaboration. So I think you look at those Green Bay teams and the way his father ran those Green Bay teams, they were very, very big on that. The idea of bringing in, I talked to Ron Wolf about this, you bring in the position coach, you bring in the scout, you get a total picture from everyone who's in the room about, the guy you're going after. So, it's going to be interesting to see if everyone over here wants, let's say, Marvin Harrison Jr. and someone over here wants Jaden Daniels, what they end up doing. But again, so far, they're all on the same page.
So you just hit on it. I think it's time to transition just a little bit more to the NFL draft happening in 6 days. It is kind of my favorite time of year. I just love all these 30 visits, all the combine, the Senior Bowl, just everything leading up to this weekend coming up, or next weekend coming up, it should stay. And it's also interesting because all this information coming out isn't really from the teams, right? It's kind of from agents and that sort of thing. And no one really knows what's going to happen. They can say they have a good idea, but there's a reason that no one will ever get a complete first-round mock draft correct. If you're the Patriots at number 3, and obviously Caleb Williams, let's just say he's off the board, but let's just pretend you have the option between Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and you can obviously, and anyone else. You can trade back. You have both the top 2 quarterbacks besides Williams. You're the Patriots GM. They hired you for this NFL draft. What are you doing?
Jaden Daniels. I'm taking Jaden Daniels. I do. If I have a choice between one of the two, I'm going with Daniels. The only way that they do not pick a quarterback at number 3 is if they entertain the idea of the trade down. Now, the rumors that we've heard, a lot of the rumors that we've heard, Minnesota, 11-23. I wouldn't take it for 11 and 23, but I would take it for 11-23 and something else. whether that's another first rounder or a wide receiver or a left tackle or whatever the case may be, then you could trade down and you could take Michael Penix in the later stage of the first round. Ben, I think we've talked about this before. I can't seem to shake the Michael Penix shadow. Talking to guys who played with him at Washington, they just get this look on their faces like, you don't understand. This is a guy who's destined for greatness. Being in the huddle with him, playing with him, locker room, in the locker room, he's a leader. He's the kind of guy you want on your roster. I hate leaning into intangibles so heavily, but when you hear people talk so much about Michael Penix's intangibles, it's part of the conversation. And so I think that's the only way that you don't take a quarterback at number 3, is if you continue to hear that in the back of your head, the idea of Michael Penix, he's the guy. I know he has health issues. I get all that history with the knees and the shoulder and all that. But if you think that he might have those intangibles, those, just enough to succeed in the National Football League, then I think you entertain the idea of a potential trade down. But if all things were equal, and Minnesota doesn't come at you with a Godfather offer, and Jaden Daniels is there at number 3, I'm taking Jaden Daniels.
Do you think Penix would be in play for pick 11, or like if it's a Minnesota trade, in play for pick 11, or would he be pick 23?
Pick 23. I still wouldn't. I look, as much as I'm, I continue to be haunted by the idea of Michael Penix in a Patriots uniform. Haunted isn't the right word. I shouldn't say that, but intrigued by the idea of Michael Penix in a Patriots uniform. I wouldn't pick him, in the top dozen or so. I would wait around with an idea toward maybe taking, I don't know if he's there, Malik Neighbors, Ryan Thomas at 11. And then, waiting around and getting Penix a little bit later on. So, yeah, I think part of it for me on Daniels is that I was there at LSU for the pro day, talked to him, talked to people who just believe in him 100%. And I know that he is a little slight, and it's all relative here when I say slight. He's 6'4", 210. But he talked about the ability to take a hit and learning, to quote the great Julian Edelman, learning when the journey's over. He's still a work in progress in that. And I think he's going to continue to be a work in progress on that. But if he stays healthy, he's a home run pick for them.
So theoretically, if the Patriots were to trade with Minnesota and they would get 11 and 23, I know they just signed Hunter Henry to a 3-year extension. They got Austin Hooper. But if Brock Bowers is available and Romeo Duzé, Malik Neighbors, and Marvin Harrison is off the board, even though you have those 2 tight ends, would you pull the trigger and get him?
I think he'd be a guy I would consider. I go back to the old Bill belief that you can't have enough talent. It's a matter, when you create competition, and it's all part of it. But yeah, I would think about Brock Bowers at that spot. I certainly would. Look, you need to create competition on the offensive side of the ball. I would go for a wide receiver at first, before I would consider a tight end. But yeah, look, all options are available. I think that the only sure things that we know in this draft, like you said, Caleb Williams is number 1. The offensive skill position guys who are not at quarterback, the best guy out there is Marvin Harrison Jr. And everything else after that is just, you don't know. You don't know. Did I say the magic word or something?
I just saw that.
So it is. It's a magic word. But yeah, those are the 2 things we know. The rest of it, I don't want to say it's a crapshoot. You do your best. You do as much homework as you can. You try and find the right fit, and you go from there.
So backtracking a little bit to what you had said about Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix, how you've talked with people close to them, teammates, coaches, whoever it may be, and you've just heard about how hard workers they are, and things of that nature. Have you had any sort of talking with Drake May's team or JJ McCarthy's? Have you heard anything about them?
Not as much as I've heard about the other guys. And Zach, and I think that's a great point. And I think part of it is this draft process, you guys know this too. It's the guys you see more, you start to, I think, fall in love with a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I think that's just part of it. I fully cop to the fact that, look, Drake May could be better than Jaden Daniels, but I've seen Jaden Daniels with my own two eyes, and I could speak to that, and I could say, look, I think this kid's going to be special because I had a chance to see him. I had a chance to talk. I just haven't had that same sort of opportunity with either Drake May's people or JJ McCarthy's people. So yeah, it's paralysis by overanalysis is what it is at this time of year. We've had 3 months to kind of go over this and replay all the scenarios in our mind. And, it can be a bit of a challenge, but yeah, I again, part of it, like I said, in my own mind, it's recency bias because I've seen him play, and I think he'd be a good fit.
Building off what you just said there, how important is it, do you think, in your eyes, for the Patriots to get that quarterback this year as opposed to waiting till next year? I don't know how much research or knowledge you have on the quarterbacks from next year, but we all know right now the Patriots are not just a quarterback away. They need that left tackle. They need a receiver. They need some help on the defensive side of the ball. Is that something that you need to do this year, or can you attack it next year?
I think you need to do it sooner rather than later. I'll put it that way. I don't want to make it sound like I'm weaseling out of the question, but I think you need to do it sooner rather than later. I think there are more sure things in this draft right now than possibilities down the road. And that's not to say that someone like, I don't know, Shedeur Sanders couldn't be great. But I think when you look at this group in a vacuum, there's enough talent there to wish upon a star, to look at it and go, you know what, this group, someone out of this group is going to be able to be a star in the National Football League. Someone not named Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams is great, and I think Caleb Williams is going to be a star. But if you're able to get Jaden Daniels, or if you think J.J. McCarthy is the best fit, I just think that there's more talent right now in this class, and there are more certainties in this class as it exists at this point than maybe in 2025. It's also tough to figure out, to try and project where a quarterback right now might be a year or two down the road, at least at the collegiate level. So yeah, I think their best course of action is to get a quarterback now.
Now, moving on, we've talked a lot about the first round, but going into the second round, we have a question in the chat from Ken. He wanted to ask about what we think the Patriots should do with the 34th overall pick. Should they trade it or draft a receiver right there? What do you think?
I think it all depends on what they end up doing at 3. If they take a quarterback at 3, then I could see them taking a wide receiver at 34. And there's a really broad group of guys who could be available late first round, early second round. I would be a little cautious about a Ladd McConkey type because I know that they have an awful lot of slot guys. But there's some guys in that vein who stand out for me, whether it's McConkey, Pearsall, Franklin might be available there at 34. You're not going to get Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Rome Odunze. You're not going to get that group of guys, but I think there's enough at that second level that will make you think. So I think that ultimately, I guess, to answer Ken's question, I think the way I see it, they take a quarterback at 3, and then I think they draft a wide receiver at 34.
Now, pivoting a little bit on what you just said there, Brandon Ayuk is a name that comes to mind that would excite all of the Patriots fans. I know it would excite the media, it would excite the fans, the fan base, everything. Is that something that's realistic on either a draft day trade or coming into the summer and training camp?
I think it's more realistic that, as well as T. Higgins too. I think that's another similar name that I think is a really good example in this case, where it would be a draft weekend trade, where you could probably I initially started this by, the draft weekend or the draft pre-draft process, thinking you could get T. Higgins for the 34, but I would wait around. You could probably get a 3 now for T. Higgins. So you're going to have to pay him eventually. But if it's going to happen, I guess ultimately is what I'm trying to say. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen around the draft. I think that's the best time to do something like that. if Cincinnati calls, if San Francisco calls. I don't necessarily think either one of those are going to happen, but if it's going to happen, it's going to be a draft weekend deal.
Now, I think they're both 26. Do you have a preference between either Higgins or Ayuk based on just fitting into the Patriots offense?
I really don't. I tend to think from talking to people in San Francisco and people who've seen him more than I have, Brandon Ayuk. But I don't want to say it's 6-1, but I would probably prefer Ayuk. Again, this is just based on my own conversations with people who've covered him, people who've seen him play more often than I have. So I do think they need to upgrade at wide receiver. I did think it was interesting. My colleague Nicole Yang asked Elliot Wolf about, any insight into the Calvin Ridley deal and why that kind of fell apart. And Elliot Wolf was like, yeah, they offered more money. So it's like, what are you going to do? So they were there. They were in it. They were in this, they were in the Calvin Ridley business for a little while. And it's going to be interesting to see if that overall philosophy kind of extends itself to one of the two guys that we mentioned there before.
If the Patriots were to get Jaden Daniels with the 3rd overall pick, do you think that would make it potentially more likely for them to trade for Brandon Ayuk, who, the former college teammates, they have a connection there? You think there's any potential for that to happen?
Yeah, Zach, I do think there is probably a slight potential for that to happen. I'm a proponent of pairing those types of guys. Being able to find, if the Patriots draft Michael Penix Jr., I like the idea of them also getting Jalen Polk. That level of familiarity that might not exist. I think it's good. I do. I think it's good. I think it would make a lot of sense. I don't necessarily think that would be the sole reason, but I think that would, you could put that on a list and you could say, look, the chance to play with a guy, chance to play with the quarterback, you already have that, well-established shorthand. I think it would be part of it.
And then connecting with that, I know you're more of a Jaden Daniels guy, but if the Patriots were to get Drake May, would you prefer them to get a wide receiver at 34 or get an offensive tackle and then pair Drake May up with Devontae Walker?
I think that's a great question. That's a great question. I included Tez Walker on some of my pre-draft, potential Patriot lists if they do go after Drake May for that very specific reason. Because again, I think it's great. I think when you're able to pair the college quarterback, college wide receiver, I think it makes an awful lot of sense because again, there's that shorthand that's already kind of baked into their DNA. I would still say if you're going after, if you do get Drake May, I would also put, maybe one of those 2nd-round tackle types into the conversation. I think they still need to build depth at that spot, but it's awful tough to pass up, on a pass catcher, especially when you look at this roster. So it's going to be interesting to see what they end up doing, but I think it's a great question specific to May and the rest of the Carolina wide receiver possibilities.
Now, at the end of last show, Zach and I kind of went through a best case scenario. We've been talking a lot of ifs, whats, ands, buts, all of that. But in your eyes, kind of a best case scenario. And before you answer, I still have what Zach and I wrote down for 2 days ago. So this is both of ours. We kind of traded picks here. We have quarterback 1, Drake May. We have then Brandon Ayuk, Kendrick Bourne, Pop Douglas, and Roman Wilson as the receivers. And then we have Stevenson and Kentucky's Ray Davis as the 2 running backs. Then we have Hunter Henry and Tip Raymond as the tight ends. And then across the line, we have Kingsley. I really want to say his last name correctly, but I don't think I can. And then we have Cole Strange, David Andrews, City So, and Michael Wendell.
So you're asking what would be an ideal draft for? I'll give you this. I'll say this. There are 3 spots they need to target in the first 2 days of the draft. And it's quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle. They need to get a quarterback, and they need to build depth at wide receiver and offensive tackle. And I would probably look to go quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle in that kind of in that order. And then day 3, I'm looking a little bit on the defensive side of the ball, to be honest with you guys. And I'm forgetting his name now off the top of my head. I don't think he's going to last till day 3, but the kid from Everett who went to Michigan, Sainer still. It's a reach, but they're going to need to build the safety depth a little bit. I also think too, part of this is when you talk about team building, there are still a handful of guys out there who are free agents. And I've been doing my due diligence to speak Stephon Gilmore's return into existence, which would help create a little stability in a room that didn't have a whole lot of stability at the end of the year last year for health and other reasons. But I think that's part of it when you talk about this draft process, that there's still some guys out there that you can look at. I'm not saying that, they're grade A free agents, but at the same time, you can incorporate them post-draft and put a better product on the field moving forward as a result. But I guess ultimately to answer your question, quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle, and then to kind of start looking at some of those day 3 guys on the defensive side of the ball as possibilities. I do think that, and this is something I talked about with Chris Hogan, there are a couple of really interesting UDFA types, round 7 guys, undrafted free agent types who could end up helping out. It inevitably seems like it's either a wide receiver or a running back. And so I want to see them get back into the third down back business. Whether that is, whether you're leaning on Gibson, whatever the case may be, they need to get a James White type back in there. And I know it's easier said than done, but maybe you can find one on day 3 or as an undrafted free agent to be able to augment that roster. So I don't know. I'm kind of weaseling out of the question, but I think if you go, vaguely, you're looking at those 3 positions, your first 2 days of the draft. If you come in with one of those 3, if you come in with guys who can fill those 3 positions starting on day 1, you feel pretty good about where you are at the draft. The last thing I'll say on this, it's told a long, long time ago, is that if you can find 3 long-term starters in every draft, you're doing your job. If you can find 3 guys who end up being long-term starters on your team, you're doing your job. And they are at least positioned. It's another matter of being able to execute once they get in the building, but they're at least positioned to find 3 guys who will be able to impact this roster in 2024 and beyond, starting on draft weekend.
And speaking on Stephon Gilmore a little bit, him lasting this long in free agency is a bit of a surprise. What do you think the chances are that the Patriots could get him? Do you think it's likely or kind of a long shot?
I think it's more likely with every passing day. I know he really likes Gerard Mayo. I know there's not a bag of cash out there waiting for him. I know he's at the stage of his career where he's more of a mentor type than a defensive player of the year type. And so the idea of bringing him back on a 1-year deal, a 2-year deal, to be a mentor to guys like Marcus Jones, to be a mentor to some of the younger guys, the younger defensive guys on that roster, to be able to create a little stability there in the post-Matthew Slater, Devin McCourty era, I think is really important. And I think that's part of it as well. You need to be able to bring back a guy who's won a Super Bowl, who knows what it's like to be able to have success in that building. And the opportunity to sign a guy back like Stephon Gilmore, I think would really speak volumes. It's not a huge personnel move. It's not going to, take them from 4-13 to the postseason, but it's going to say something about the direction that they're headed as a franchise when you bring back a high character guy like that.
I agree. And I guess just with that, that's going to bring us pretty much right to the end of the show. So, Chris, we really appreciate you coming on, taking time out of your Friday evening to talk with us. I guess let the people know where they can find you on social media.
I'm at C Price Globe on Twitter. That's C Price Globe. You can also read my stuff in the Boston Globe and bostonglobe.com. I'm the co-host of the Patriots Report on the Believe Network with Chris Hogan. We record usually once, maybe twice a week. And so you can look for for a podcast there as well. But I appreciate the opportunity to come on with you guys and chop it up, and hopefully we can do it again real soon.
For sure.
Yeah, that was awesome. And Zach, real quick, where can they find us for announcements like who will be our next guest next week, when will we be streaming next week, and most importantly, when, what time, what day next week will we be streaming?
Oh, they can find it right. Oh, if it's going to pop up. There we go. Right down here, Ben. Right at the bottom of the screen. Instagram, Pats Nation Nightly, and Twitter or X, Pats Nation Night. We announce all the streams on there, the times. If we have to change anything, that's where it all goes first. So go ahead, follow the socials down there. And I think we'll probably be live on Monday, but time to be determined for a little mock draft Monday, week of the biggest week of April. So, yeah, again, Chris, we appreciate you for coming on. Everybody listening, we appreciate you tuning in, and everybody go have a great Friday night. Thank you.
Thank you.